There's almost a snobbery with IQ. It needs levelling. And we know this in schools. You have people who are very smart, but they can't kick a football. But you have people who are very skilled as athletes who might struggle with mathematics and English. Sometimes when you find your gift, you tend to neglect the things that are less interesting to you. And is AI an intelligence? Some people question that. And the way it's currently measured, it can't be, because it's self-report. Which is easy, it's quick and dirty, you can complete it in 12 minutes, you can make money selling the instruments, and people tend to be happy with the profile because they've filled it in themselves. Of course they would. If I say, I'm not good at this and good at this, and it comes back and say, hey, you're not good at A, but you're good at B, hey, that's very accurate. Of course, because you filled the questionnaire in. Affirmation and confirmation made the self-report popular for individuals, but not for gatekeepers, because they couldn't rely on it, because it's subjective opinion. You can't follow people round for 3 years to assess them interacting with the family and workers, so you have to develop a reality simulation, like a flight simulator, to simulate as near as possible real-life situations to see how people behave or judge the situation in that context. The power of the knowing yourself, perceptions of yourself, and the objective score, and the differences between those three, that's the gold dust, can be really useful for developmental purposes. But our goal at Emotional Intelligence Academy is to take emotional skills into schools. If we can get reading, writing, arithmetic and emotional skilling, so 4 skills at 4-year-old, so that they're able to understand and manage their own emotions and understand and interact with others, then isn't that going to be healthier for the world? Prevention's much easier than cure. So if we can help children to manage traumatic situations through their life, wouldn't that help?
Hand over, back, or reverse backwards and let Cliff come to the fore.
Thank you very much. Okay, my name's Cliff Lansley, so I'm a fellow director with Erin at the Emotional Intelligence Academy. And my passion is on exactly this topic, emotional intelligence. So my doctorate was in this area, my research has been in this area, and interesting from the first couple of groups, hearing you're keen to see how this is applied in organisations and the corporate world. I've spent 30 years working in organisations, so normally working in leadership and HR, so doing leadership development and HR provision. And as the CEO of 2 of those businesses, it's actually running the business rather than just teaching. So using this as a developer, but also using this as a practitioner. When you've got around 50 people cross-culturally that you've got to manage in an organisation, then getting things done through people, which is the definition of management, relies on good knowledge of your own skills and of how you manage your emotions in highly charged situations. But also how you can interact and influence others towards constructive outcomes. So it's my job to give you a whistle-stop tour through the emotional intelligence field. What's gone on in the last 100 years with emotional intelligence? What's gone on particularly in the last 20 years? And how does it stack up now? Because if I'm working in an organisation and that my board or my colleagues say, hey, we need to do something to help our staff with emotional intelligence. Where do you start? And it really is, I've used this word quite freely, a dog's dinner or a dog's breakfast, which is colloquialism for, it's a kind of a mess right now in terms of which model do you start with and where do you go. So hopefully these 8 slides will just anchor and summarise that. And this isn't the end of the story, because we're spending 3 days working through some of these challenges and some of these models. So first of all, the history, where did this all come from? Going back to 1920, we had Thorndike, who looked at social intelligence. He didn't really use the term emotional intelligence, but that's when it all started. And then Gardner came in the 1900s with multiple intelligence, said, hang on a minute, why measure everyone's smartness on their scholastic or academic intelligence only? You may have seen the cartoon of the chimpanzee and the fish and the giraffe and the gorilla being coached to climb a tree. And he was saying schools actually are making a mistake. They're training everyone to be a chimp. When people have multiple gifts, when we've got individual differences, why should IQ be the only measure? So he did come up with emotional intelligence, but he called it intrapersonal and interpersonal, which is intra is to do with yourself and inter is to do with interacting with others. So those were two of his multiple intelligences. But he also looked at music and manual dexterity and physical in terms of those who are good with their hands. He did include numerical and logical intelligence, but he took it much wider to cover those who were into the arts, into dance, into music, and all those areas. If people have a gift, and they shouldn't be deemed less smart just because they don't do well in a school system that's heavily geared to scholastic academic abilities. And so that theory of multiple intelligences opened the field up. And it was criticised as well, because there's a lot to lose from those who are driven by the academic system. But it just helped to level the playing field a little bit and to encourage educational establishments to remember, there are other smart clusters as well as IQ. And then the first time the emotional intelligence phrase was used, it was by a guy called Wayne Payne, and he included this in his thesis, in his study. That was the first claim to fame where those two words were put together. Reuven Bar-On claims that he introduced it, but his first statement about emotional intelligence came after Payne's dissertation. But he did some good work, and he brought together a mixed model of emotional intelligence. And I'm using the word mixed there because he mixed the abilities, like in IQ, you've got to be able to solve problems in numeracy and words and move things around spatially. So he did some ability statements, but he also put in some trait statements, things to do with your personality and characteristics of a person, which are not necessarily something that you can train. Many people believe traits and personality are factors which are fairly permanent from the age of 7. Some say a little bit later than that, unless you go through trauma. So he brought in this mixed model, and I've emphasised mixed for good reasons, as you'll see later. And then we had Meyer, Solovey and Caruso. They brought in a model, and when you get a model, you normally have a tool to measure the factors in the emotional intelligence framework that they've developed. And that was abbreviated to MESQITE, which is their names, Meyer, Solovey, Caruso, Emotional Intelligence Test. So you've got this mixture, and they were the first ones to move the EQ measurement solely towards ability, because one of the arguments is if you can't have right and wrong answers like in an IQ test, if you just have self-perception like a personality test about your traits, then it will never gain popularity and equivalence to IQ. So rather than EQ sit below IQ, let's give it the status it deserves, but you need a measure that's got right and wrong answers. Because if you ask me what my IQ is, I could say, I think it's about 140, but that needs validating. So I need to do an IQ test. In EQ, if you ask me what my EQ is, I do a self-report or maybe 360-degree survey, and then whatever I or my colleagues say I am, I claim that number. Now, the world recruiters and gatekeepers and universities wouldn't accept a self-reported figure for decisions for promotion, for pay, and for entry into academic institutions, because it's subjective. So the objectivity needs to be brought in, and MESQITE were the first ones to do that. Now, MESQITE has gained a lot of popularity, but it's also got its critics because of the way some of the things are measured, and we'll come to that later. And then Petrides put forward a TQ, which is the Trait Emotional Intelligence Questionnaire. And that was, he claimed, was a trait model, but that too had some abilities in and skills. So it wasn't pure trait, it was mixed. So when he says it's a trait model and it's in his title, it isn't a trait model, it's a mixed model. And then Ekman isn't known in the emotional intelligence world. In fact, I interviewed him and had a 1-hour conversation with him about what's your views on emotional intelligence. And he says, I don't think it's an intelligence. But by the end of the 60 minutes, he realized that his book, which was called Emotions Revealed, which was released in 2003, was actually structured into 4 sections. And the sections were awareness of your own abilities and your own emotions, the ability to interrupt those emotions and so that they manifest and manage with your thoughts and your actions constructively. The 3rd section was read others' emotions, and the 4th section was interact constructively with others when in emotionally charged situations, which are the 4 quadrants and the 4 sections of most emotional intelligence models. So perhaps even Paul Ekman was closer to the emotional intelligence framework than he believed he was. But he focused his stuff on skills, skill building. And then Goleman wrote a book. He was a journalist and a psychologist, but he wrote a book. And Daniel Goleman's framework, he developed, there's 2 or 3 models batting around. They changed and evolved over time. But the core of his text is 25 competencies. And they are right across the spectrum in terms of skills, abilities, knowledge and traits. So his 2 took us back to a mixed model. And the problem with a mixed model is you can't measure it with one instrument. So personality and trait you can measure with self-assessment. Ability you can measure with a test. If you've got a mixture of traits and abilities, then measuring that is very complex and difficult. But he had to resort, like the rest of the people in this list, to self-report, which is easy. It's quick and dirty. You can complete it in 12 minutes or 20 minutes. It's cheap enough. You can make money selling the instruments, and people tend to be happy with the profile because they filled it in themselves. Of course they would. So if I say, I'm not good at this and good at this, and it comes back and say, hey, you're not good at A, but you're good at B, hey, that's very accurate. Of course, because you fill the questionnaire in. So that kind of affirmation and confirmation made the self-report popular for individuals, but not for gatekeepers because they couldn't rely on it, because it's subjective opinion. And so Goleman with Boyatzis, they were colleagues on various projects, did do a good job though of publicising and putting EI on the map. So emotional intelligence was put on the map, and a lot of credit must go to Goleman for that. But unfortunately he didn't take the model forward and pick up from Mesquite's work and learn that we've got to get this into the intelligence framework. So over the last 5 years, the last 15 years, we've been waiting for someone to develop, nothing's been going on. Somebody develop an emotional intelligence model because we need one for the work that we're doing. Because we're doing work on global compassion and security and safety. So our behavioural analysis work and our emotional intelligence work is important to us. But we didn't want to rest our work on these flimsy foundations. And so we've been waiting and waiting and waiting. So 5 years ago, we give up. And I asked my colleagues here, because I was passionate on this, can you put me on a sabbatical? Can you release me from my day-to-day duties? And I want to drive a piece of research forward to develop an emotional intelligence model that learns from all these previous ones, but can be measured and will deserve a place alongside IQ with right-wrong answers. And so they did that. And so rather than just do the research, I'm 62 now, so I was 57 when I started this. I was the oldest student in Manchester University. But I said, I want to do this under a PhD because that makes it rigorous and makes it open to peer review and supervision and challenge. Because if we use this model in the future, we're going to be challenged by academics to say, has this been peer reviewed and on what basis is this model developed? And we're also going to be challenged by industry saying, does it work? So those are the 2 areas that prompted me to put this within the framework of a research PhD, which I finished last year. And the outcomes, I'll send you the detail of the outcomes for those who want to read it. In fact, what we've got, so I'll just show this up on the big screen here, is that's the thesis. I know I'm showing off my work here, I'm really proud of it, but the 100,000 words in there, it's not too many pages, but if I send it you as a PDF for your own reference, then fine. If you want to print it off, then it's okay for stopping door shutting. You can use it as a door shutter. Or if you've got a wobbly chair, you can put it under a wobbly chair. But that gives you the basis, because if you are keen to know hang on a minute, what's the background to this, who says, then this gives you the references and the basis that the model that we're going to share with you was created with. So that's slide one. Now that really is a distillation. It almost is an insult to the amount of research that's gone on, because the research, especially in the last 7 years, has been going exponentially. But the problem is students and practitioners are building their research on flaky foundations. They're using the old models. And so we wanted to break that. We want to give students of the future something that's more secure, to do their comparison of, how do people working in the medical profession compare, and are the best nurses and the best doctors also the ones that are high in emotional intelligence? And claims are being made of, well, yes, they are, I know they aren't, but the trouble is, if the EI measure is fluid and flaky, then those comparisons, many people could be wasting the time. And it hurts me to see students putting 3 years work in to a research project based on something that's flaky. And so that's one of the passions. The overriding passion is we want to get this into schools. So this was for adults, the research that we've done. Most of these models, all of these models are for adults, 18 plus. It seems to be the demographic. But our goal at Emotional Intelligence Academy is to take emotional skills into schools, because at 4-year-old, and this is where our pro bono work goes, at 4-year-olds and 9-year-olds, if we can get reading, writing, arithmetic and emotional skilling, so 4 skills at 4-year-old, so that they're able to understand and manage their own emotions and understand and interact with others, then isn't that going to be healthier for the world? Because if prevention's much easier than cure. So if we can help children to manage traumatic situations through their life, whether it's at school or home or elsewhere, especially with social media now, which is quite cruel, it's what goes on between some children. If we can get that awareness and give them some tool sets to handle their thinking, which is well-being, and handle their actions, which can result in violence and aggression, then wouldn't that help? We think so, and that's where we put in a lot of our pro bono work. So we're modifying the emotional intelligence model that we're driving for adults into a framework and games and activities that can be done in primary schools. And we've got some pilot work going on in Manchester now in the UK, and we hope to push that wider once we're confident with that. So that's what keeps us awake at night. So how can we, yes, drive this forward and fix the dog's dinner of emotional intelligence models to help businesses and organisations and individuals and adults, but also how can we convert that into something that we can get into schools? So that's our driver. I'm not seeing any hands up, so I'll back off to the slide 2, which is a busy slide. And again, don't worry, you're going to get this slide as part of the production, and then you can freeze the video and study this in depth. Plus, this is one of my figures in the PDF dissertation I'll send to you. So there's a lot of pictures. I like pictures. So there's a lot of data, of course. You have to do that for validation. But there's a lot of pictures and frameworks. So this framework pulls together those models I've just talked you through, and it tells you who was the prime architect in column 2. And then it looks in column 3 about who's the commercial people behind this. You've got to watch that too, because some people have changed the models, not because research has moved on, but because their commercial partner said, hang on a minute, we've got an array of competencies here. It'd be nice if you could cherry pick some of those rather than us change it all for your wording. And so there's some contamination coming from the commercial sector. You've got to know the agenda of who asked these architects in column 2 to write the instrument. You've got to work out, does that commercial association contaminate the model? And if you know there's the bias in there, then you can judge and evaluate the tools in more depth. So I did that. And I was challenged by the university, oh, you can't go there, you know, you can't challenge commercial agendas. I said, well, you watch, because we need to be aware of contamination. And this is just of the 8 models that were in the research, because I only took models which were heavily published and peer-reviewed, and also popular. So they come up multiple times in Google when you search for that framework and emotional intelligence. So the search criteria whittled it down to 8 tools, and these 8 tools are the ones down the left-hand side here. If you've worked in this area, you'll know these, but if it's all new and gobbledygook, just bear with me. But these abbreviations down the left, which you might be able to make on your screen if you pinned it. EQI from Baron, Sani, they never developed a tool, but it was a great model. Genos International, and Mesquite, the one that's the only ability tool in the whole array there. The rest are mixed. All of them are mixed. There's no trait models on the market. So the commercial associations, and then how are they scored? Self, self-report. Biased to own perception. And if you're not good at emotional intelligence, you don't really know you're not good at emotional intelligence because you're not tuned in enough or alert enough to how you're coming across, because you're arrogant and blind to it, because you don't pay attention and you don't work out the impact of your interactions with others. So there's flaws with self-report, but sometimes to get inside the head, you need self-report featuring in the instrument. And this is why we're going to share that with you in terms of how we're going to do that. And then multi, or some people call it 360 degree, multiple raters, people around you who are the victims or the recipients of your emotional intelligence, who may actually know you better than you know yourself. So that's rich, and that can give you a piece of feedback. But experts or consensus on Mesquite, and that's the only one where it features, is what do experts say? Now, Mesquite made a mistake. They got 21 students from a conference who were left over at the end of the conference and said, what do you think is the right answer? And they call them experts, and that's been challenged. So the expert decisions that you're benchmarked against was really from academics, not experienced practitioners and subject matter experts and academics are combined. And so that's where Mesquite gets a bit of a hammering on those who are doing research around it. Consensus means your score aligns with everybody else's score, and therefore it must be right. Well, no, there's a lot of people who struggle with what the right answer is when it comes to some of the more challenging emotional intelligence interactions. So what we did is pull these together. How many criteria in there? They range from 8 to 18 on there. If you can't see the screen, you've got between 8 and 18 competencies, or factors, as I'll call them from now on, because some of them aren't competencies, they're traits. So you've got about a dozen plus or minus 6 factors that are in each of those tools. And there's only a couple that's generic. Mesquite was generic. The TQ is generic, but the rest have been developed for leaders. So the Goldman model was developed for leaders. And then they adapted it for schools and put it into the American system, develop social emotional learning and social emotional aspects of learning in the UK. Those were the curriculums that were forced into schools, which were based on models developed for adult leaders. It was a misfit, and that's why it didn't work, and it's now been rejected out of the schools, which is why we want to go back in there. So you can't use a leadership model, or even if it's biased towards well-being. Emotional intelligence people, not everybody is focused on well-being. If I'm a martial artist, I want to learn and manage my emotions so I don't lose my temper, but I want to read what the other person is feeling at this moment in time so I can beat him or beat her. Some CEOs of businesses, Pepsi and Coke, are violent enemies. They don't want well-being and collaboration. They want to protect the jobs of the people who work for them, who they're committed to. And that means being aggressive towards another organization. And emotional intelligence can help them. So there's a dark side for emotional intelligence where it can be used for manipulation, which we have to be careful of. rather than influence, where for positive or well-being or those outcomes. But you need a clean model and not dictate to the individual their ethical values. So keep it clean, and if they want to use it for well-being, if they want to use it for win-win relationships, if they want to use it for sport, they can do. But if they want to use it to be competitive, to protect their brand and their people, then what's wrong with that? And we hope people use it for pro-social reasons, not destructive reasons. But we can't dictate that in the model. So most of these are contaminated with agendas, and we had to clean that agenda contamination out. And then down here, trait, mixability. We listed here if the claimed model type, So Petrody said his model is traits, isn't. The actual model type, as the thesis comes out towards the end, is it's a mixed model. But this was the claimed, only one trait, the rest admitted to being mixed. Sarni and Gino said theirs were ability. Sarni was right, hers were ability, but Geno's isn't, it's mixed. So, this was the stock take that came out. And then this busy slide, I'm not going to ask you to read that, don't worry. I'm just trying to show a 100,000 word thesis on one page. So what we did is list all them 16 competencies, look at where they fell, and then aggregated or disaggregated them back to a framework that was core but also uncontaminated. So that diagram is the appendix 1 in the thesis, which folds out if you wanted to analyse all the models against each other to see where they had common factors. And you'll see some of the common factors are those that work under Haymet Beer. Surprise, surprise, because they're drawing the competencies from the same repository of commercial competencies. So that's why the commercial angle helped. The main challenges holding back emotional intelligence were these. There's diverse interest, and a researcher called Zeidner said emotional intelligence has tended to obscure definitional clarity, which means there's no common definition. There's disagreements on what emotional intelligence is. Some people think it's being nice. No, it's not. Some people think it's being smart and intelligent because there should be a correlation between IQ and EQ. No, there shouldn't. Research doesn't support that. So there's no clarity on that. So I've offered a definition in the thesis, which I'll share with you as a group here, which captures the core of what people do agree on. There's flawed assumptions about that IQ-EQ correlation. So this came from Mayer, from Mesquite. They said if your EQ score doesn't correlate with IQ, it must be a poor tool. No, because there could be an inverse correlation. The smarter you get, the more arrogant you might become, and the more less receptive you might be to what's going on for you and other people. And so smartness, you could have big heads but a small heart. So the academic strength might actually relegate your IQ abilities that you have into lower down the spectrum, so you don't use them and they become rusty. Now that's a hypothesis. It's not been, there's no good research yet because there's no EQ tool. But once we've got an EQ tool, let's measure those with high IQ. Have they got an high EQ? And my hypothesis is there will be little or no correlation between the two. So why should researchers, and some of our students are doing this in the MSc, be misled by if the EQ model doesn't correlate with IQ, it's a poor model, when the research doesn't support that. So we've got to be careful. And we know this in schools. You have people who are very smart, but they can't kick a football, or they can't draw or paint. But you have people who are very skilled as athletes, who might struggle with mathematics and English. And sometimes some are good at both. But sometimes when you find your gift, you tend to neglect the things that are less interesting to you. And that perpetuates through the education process. So there's oversold benefits, and Goldman's the culprit here, and the researchers Zeidner and Jordan et al., this is 2006, they said, hang on a minute, It's 11 times more or 80% more valuable than IQ. So EQ is much better, therefore do EQ courses and buy our tools, is an oversell. And they found no empirical evidence that wasn't from students who feel better after the course. So apart from that those bias groups, they couldn't find any empirical evidence that supported the claim that EQ, people who are successful, wherever that is, in life or work, however you define that, have got higher EQs than IQ, so it matters more. The evidence isn't good on that. So those claim, it might be true. My hypothesis is that there is some substance in that, but we can't prove it yet, so we've got to be careful about those claims. And the word that Mayer used, John Mayer's, or Jack Mayer, I've had conversations with him, and he has to be careful because he's working in commercial frameworks and we had to sign some non-disclosures. But what he said in the literature is the research is degenerating and we've got a lot of defensive shifts from the ability and trait people. And is AI an intelligence? Some people question that. And the way it's currently measured, it can't be because it's self-report. So we've got to put the framework around it and put the instruments around it to give it the place it deserves, not under IQ, but alongside IQ. And then maybe the manual dexterity and the art and the sports, the other intelligences can be up there on that top level too. So the IQ, there's almost a snobbery with IQ. It needs leveling, and we're going to work on certainly the EQ part of that leveling process. Developers are defaulting to self-report because it's easy, quick and dirty. You can generate a self-report questionnaire with 36 items in that gives you a score against 12 competencies. Quite easy. Many people do it. We've just done it and it was easy. So is it reliable? No. Not for gatekeeper decisions because you've got the subjectivity of the individual doing the assessment. And then there's multiple unclear complex models, as you've seen, which is traits, ability, or a mixture of the two. So those were the challenges holding it back. And we've broke through most of those challenges with the model I'm going to share with you. And all we did was disaggregate and pull back. That's a big word for, like you're sorting rocks out in a quarry. You just want the big rocks. So you shake out all the dust and you come back with the core rocks. So that's what we've done. We've pulled it all back and put it into 12 competencies, which I'll show you on a better diagram. And we've also looked at what's the traits. Traits are important. Context is everything. So the way you apply your competence depends on your personality and traits. And if you don't know those, then that won't help you to understand others or perform and manage your own abilities and skills. So we've not got to reject those. So what I've done is pull them out of all the models, stuck them in a box for treatment later. And I'll tell you about the treatment later afterwards. And then applications. You can't read this, so I'll read it to you. In this middle column, the treatment and the applications of these are in interviewing, relationship building, meeting people, leading people, managing people, developing people, supporting, negotiating, competing and performing. So whether you're an actor or you're a crisis negotiator or you're a coach or you're a therapist, they'll fit into those categories. So the model's got to cope with the applications if it's going to be of any value, otherwise it won't get used. So that's the geeky model, and then we turned it into a prettier model, which is this one. So here is the context is everything, but we've got self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, awareness of others, some people call that, or social interaction management, the interaction with others, how you manage that. So just to blow you in for that, because it's a small text. Under self-management, these are the 3 competencies. So for those who haven't got this pinned as a big screen, I'll just read them quickly to you. Can you perceive and label your own emotions as they occur? Can you identify and anticipate triggers for your own emotions? Can you anticipate situations where you're going to get wound up or react rather than respond? And can you appraise and work out the appropriateness of, is what I'm going to do appropriate for the situation or not? So that's an internal process in terms of your ability to understand what's going on in that first half a second of an emotional episode. And then what do you do about that? Do you let it flow? If someone's attacking my kids and I want to react like a chimp and thump them, if it's their life or their life, I'll kill them. I'll go to prison for it because I'd die for my kids. And anger serves and charges up your arms to act and as your best weapon, something that's a threat of harm. And if someone's threatening my grandchildren or my children, then I will not even hesitate half a second to think about the consequences and the CCTV cameras, and I'll go in and protect my children. And I'll die for them. So that's the way we've evolved. So you've got but sometimes they get you into trouble. So do you interrupt those initial thoughts and your own emotional reactions where appropriate? Because this is another adult, I'm overreacting and really I need to back off. So do you interrupt those initial thoughts? Do you adopt strategies to manage your own emotions where appropriate? Because they are meant to serve you. But if it's inappropriate, how do I just hold the reins a little bit, pull that back, and then initiate and regulate those emotions, turn them up, turn them down, and use tactics to do that. We'll give you some to support the goals of that interaction. So if you're a martial artist and you're fighting, it's different from when you're having a disagreement with your partner and you want to resolve that in a constructive way. So it depends what your goals are. So what your shared goals are and also what your goals are, which may be different from the other person. Is that okay so far? So that's six, that's half the job done. This is easy. What's so complicated about EI? And this one is social awareness. Read others' emotions across multiple channels, not just the face, not just from what they write on text messages, but across all the communication channels. We'll cover that, and Erin will go into detail on that later. We need to hypothesize about those signals. The brows are down, so they're angry. No, they're thinking. You've got to work out what else could be going on for that person. And it might not just be about the situation. They could be upset about a thought they've just had. So you need to hypothesize about other signals and then appraise your options, just like we did in the self-management, self-awareness of, right, what's the tactics I could employ here? And then you employ them. You engage the other person in a way that's appropriate to your goals. And one of those engagement tactics might be to walk away. But you engage them appropriate to the goals of that interaction, because we're now into interactions. You interact appropriately to analyze and understand others. So you might want to test your hypotheses and work out what they're really thinking and feeling, rather than what they've just said. Some people say things that they don't mean. So you've got the words, the thinking, the feeling, the values, the beliefs underneath the iceberg. And sometimes you might need to just probe a little bit and ask twice or ask again, are you okay? And then influence others towards goals, whatever those goals be. And we don't dictate or bias people on that. So there is the model, and I offered you a definition as well, which was emotional intelligence is the ability to do three things: perceive, understand, and influence. So perceive is work out what's going on, understand what's going on, and therefore, number three, influence our own thoughts and actions. So it's our own and others' emotions to guide our thoughts and actions. So we've got to work on thoughts too, because we can get depressed. And our well-being is important, so we need to do self-talks and we need to manage our thinking. Stinking thinking doesn't help, so sometimes we have to move that. And so interrupt the thinking, interrupt the actions to guide us to achieve our goals. But centre of that is a range of contexts. Some are high stakes, some are low stakes, some are medium, in different situations, with family, with work, with strangers. So this captures the common aspects of most of the common definitions which people were happy with, and only includes factors which multiple definitions included. So this was again aggregated like in the quarry to bring the big chunks into one sentence with one full stop. That wasn't easy. But when we put that back out to the subject matter experts, I'll tell you those were later, we got a thumbs up from 92% of them. Some didn't like the word goals, and I'll come back to that again afterwards. So that's the definition that we've offered that simulates what's going on. And finally, I promise you 8 slides, was this 8th slide, which is Simon's question of, have you got any tools for this? Oh, we will have. We've got 1 and we've got 2 to come. And so number one is a self-report, which measures typical what I say I would do, but I might not do in that situation if I'm really faced with it. But I know what the right answer is because I've read the textbooks, and I can do a self-report that makes it look like I'm a good person or an emotionally intelligent person. But that helps us to get what's inside the brain of the individual. Number two is the multi-rater, so the perceived performance. What am I judged to do when others witness my performance? And then the third, what's the correct behaviour? What do I feel I should do? So you can't follow people round for 3 years to assess them interacting with the family and workers, so you have to develop a reality simulation. This is what the researchers agree on, like a flight simulator, to simulate as near as possible real life situations to see how people behave or judge the situation in that context. And you might need to check, can they transfer that performance across a range of contexts, and that needs knowledge. So we might need some knowledge in filtering into those what we've now termed situational judgment tests. So watching people interact in a context that you understand, and then working out what's right and wrong. So we'll come back to that later. But you need the three angles to have a full judgment. Now the EQ test might just be this. So it might just be the objective test. But for humans working as leaders and coaches and developers and therapists, it's the power of the knowing yourself, perceptions of yourself, and the objective score, and the differences between those three, that's the gold dust, can be really useful for developmental purposes.